Hello, good evening to you all in La Piranta and good morning from San Francisco. I'm Sanjit Sengupta, the instructor for much of this module on marketing of high technology products and innovations. And along with me, we have my colleagues, Professor Sanna Katrina Askiainen, as well as Hannes Welt, and we are all here to participate in Lecture 1. I hope you all attended the introductory lecture 2 weeks ago, where we went over some administrative procedures. And probably the most important thing to remind you is to sign up to form your groups. The groups and the teams are for the case analysis. Each team has to do 1 video presentation and 2 case memos. And we have in Moodle the link where you can go and sign up on a spreadsheet. So I'm going to share my screen right now and go to Moodle. So I hope you're able to see the Moodle screen, and let me see where the sign up is. So at this time, maybe I'll request Hannes to show us which tab is the link where we can ask the students to go and sign up for their teams. Hannes, could you tell me where to find the link for where the students can sign up for their case teams? Here, right here. It is in the introduction to case method tab, the sign up for the teams. Let's see how people have signed up. And so here are some of the teams that have been formed, and it's important that Hannes write accepted in the column. So Hannes, do you want to comment at all on this? Are we good for the team formations? So I don't see Hannes participating. Hannes, are you there? Looks like he might be having some issues with the audio, but Hannes, whenever your audio is connected, please let me know if you want to comment on any of the team formations. There were some rules for the team formation, like every team must have at least 1 international student, and you shouldn't have, what was it, in terms of the nationalities, you can't have more than 2 people from the same nationality. So I want to make sure that we have all the teams done correctly. And then let's get back to our Moodle page. So I stop my sharing and come back here to the camera. So today's lecture has 4 topics to it, and so the first 4 chapters of the book, I hope you have been able to read them and review the videos. So the way we will conduct this session is that since you have done the readings, I want to give you a chance to ask a lot of questions. And during that, if you found something was not clear during the chapter, this is a time to bring it up. If you would like some examples and illustrations. So roughly, I will allocate 30 minutes to each chapter. And the way that you're going to interact with me is through the Q&A box. So now we start with chapter 1, which is the introduction to high technology marketing. It's an overview of the whole course. So in that chapter, there were so many concepts that you were introduced to. If you have any questions on chapter 1, I'm going to ask you to go to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and start entering questions. Please limit yourself right now to chapter 1. And after about 30 minutes, we'll go on to chapter 2. So please go ahead and use the Q&A box. So Miko, I know you raised your hand, but because we have bandwidth issues, we would not allow you to speak with the microphone. Instead, I'm asking everyone to go down to the bottom of their screen. There's a Q&A box, and that's where you will enter your questions. And I'm going to use a Google Doc to copy your questions. So please go ahead. This is your time to clarify the concepts in the chapter, raise issues from your own experience. If you worked in a company or an industry that doesn't conform to some of the principles and the theories in chapter 1, then this would be a good time to raise them and we can clarify. Anis, are you now online? If you are, can you just confirm that all the groups and the teams the sign-ups are going according to your expectation, or would you like to give them any guidance on the sign-ups for the teams? So I don't see any questions. So I'm going to go to the PowerPoints and emphasize a few points from chapter 1. And while I'm doing that, if you have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box. So I hope you can see the first title slide, which says Chapter 1, Introduction to the World of High Technology Marketing. I think the main issues in this, or the starting issue in this chapter, is how do we define technology and how do we define high technology? So based on your reading, could somebody enter into the Q&A box what your definition is of what is technology? So just give an answer to this particular question. What is technology? So question for the class. What is technology? And another question is, what is high technology? These are the two questions I would like to begin with. Just go to the Q&A and enter your responses. Yeah, so nobody is answering these questions. I have to say that, this is a master's level seminar, and so we expect you to be very interactive and participative. I know the video conference is not the best medium, but we try to replicate a real class scenario, and we do the best we can with the limitations of the technology. So when I ask a question, please do try to answer. I want to thank Lisa for giving me the first answer. Knowledge that is based in latest discoveries and sciences. So this is an important answer to this question. What is high technology? High technology is knowledge or know-how that is based on latest discoveries in science and engineering. Science is very basic and engineering is the application of the science. So this is right. High technology is knowledge that is based in latest discoveries in science and engineering. And what is knowledge? Knowledge is know-how. And know-how consists of three things. It consists of, actually, knowledge is just one component of know-how. So I would add knowledge and then skills and tools. Okay, so high technology is know-how, and know-how consists of three components. Knowledge, which is theory. You should know how to build something. That is cognitively, in the mental capacity is knowledge. It's theories. Then skills is how to do it with your hands, how to actually bring the practical aspect to the knowledge. And then you can't always build things just with your mind and body, so you need some tools, some equipment, some computers, some software, right? So high technology is knowledge, skills, and tools that is based on the latest discoveries. And what is latest is still a little bit subjective, right? We don't have a objective measure of, how soon the science and engineering needs to be. In biotechnology right now, we have things like gene editing, and that's going on in the labs right now. There's a lot of animal testing, and there's some some other laboratory testing, but we haven't yet reached any human clinical trials in most of the cases. So that is really latest. But there are other things. We have a space program for so many decades, since the 1960s, but we don't yet know how to go to Mars. So, there are aspects of, lateness or the time of discovery. It could be immediate or it could be some time in the past. But the important thing is that there is a lot of uncertainty. So that's the key thing. When you want to operationalize how how late the discovery should be, we generally translate it and say is that if there is a lot of uncertainty around the science and the technology, then that is considered high technology. Okay, so technology is just know-how, which is knowledge, skills, and tools. And high technology is the knowledge, skills, and tools based on the latest discoveries. And I'm just having to rearrange my interface. And operationally, latest means there is high uncertainty around the science and engineering knowledge. Okay, so now the most important characteristic of a high-tech product, or what we call an innovation. Innovation it has two meanings. One is that it is the outcome of applying that know-how. It is the product or service which is the result of applying the know-how. It's also the process of getting to that point. So the main characteristic of a high-tech product or innovation is high uncertainty. So what are the three dimensions of uncertainty that chapter 1 talks about? Can somebody summarize what are the three types of uncertainty and what do they mean? Amit, thanks for your question. I'll come to the chasm in a bit, but let's finish this discussion on the characteristics of what a high-tech product is and what are the dimensions of high uncertainty. So question for you, what are the dimensions of uncertainty surrounding a high-tech product? And can you explain what those are? Anybody? Please write it in the Q&A box. So there are three dimensions of uncertainty surrounding a high-tech product. There's market uncertainty, there's technology uncertainty, and there's competitive volatility. So thank you, Kairit Avola. Thank you for your answer. Technology uncertainty is one dimension. Does the new innovation work as it should? Is the production on scheduling? Absolutely. Because we know that there are examples of products or innovations that they are launched with bugs in them, right? You take software, every version of any new software will have some bugs on it. Hmm? You remember there was a time when Apple launched its Maps application a few years ago, and people who used the Apple Maps, they landed up at the beach instead of at their correct destination. So there were all kinds of bugs in it. And we also know the example of Microsoft Windows, where they kept announcing a date of launch of the product, but it kept getting pushed back because it wasn't ready. So those are examples of technology uncertainty. And thank you, Maya, for adding the dimensions of market and competitor uncertainty. Could you address what is market uncertainty and what is competitor uncertainty? Or if it's easier, give me an example of market uncertainty and competitive uncertainty. So it appears that you're not able to see the Q&A. Is that right? Kairati Bhovla, somebody said that you're unable to see that. Is it better if we use the chat? Are you able to see if you address your question to all panelists in chat? That might be a easier way for people to see the Q&A. Sana, thank you. We only see Q&A when you mark them answered. So I'm going to cut and paste all the questions into the Google document. And then from now on, I would request you to please try the chat. If you enter your question in the chat and address it to all participants, then I think everybody will be able to see it. So I'm just going to copy the ones that are there up to now. So here on the Google box, I've I've typed all the questions that were asked up to now, but let's try in the chat box. Sana, can you type something to all participants, all panelists and attendees, and I want to make sure everybody can see them, or why don't I type it? Can Yes, certainly I see Sana's message which says I'll try, let's test this. Can you all see it? Yes, this is visible. All right. So now we have a change in our uh, methodology. Please use the chat instead of the Q&A because that will enable everybody to see your responses. So I'm going to close out the earlier chat box. Give me a minute. So we're not going to use the Q&A anymore, but instead we'll use the Zoom webinar chat. But let me go back to the Google documents and reflect on all of these things that have been earlier put into the Q&A box. So we have clearly 3 dimensions of uncertainty: technology, market, and competition. Market uncertainty. Lisa Ann, thank you for your response. Market uncertainty is about the market, which means about the consumers, okay, with regard to adopting the new product. So have you all had this experience when there's a new smartphone? Last Wednesday there were all these announcements from Apple about the XS and the XR and the Apple Watch 4 and so on. So those of us who already used an earlier iPhone are faced with this question: should we now buy the new iPhone XS? And there's a lot of uncertainty, right? The price point is like $1,000. Are we ready to buy? Maybe my old phone is working fine even though it's 3 years old. So there's all this uncertainty about consumer adoption, and that makes it very difficult to forecast the market size. And Yenny, thank you for your response to what is competitor uncertainty. It's about who will be the competitors in the future, and the how the needs of the consumers are changing is part of market uncertainty. If our needs change, then there's a lot of consumer uncertainty or market uncertainty. But competitors anticipating who they will be is quite a challenge because we know they could come from any source. In fact, the example is of Nokia and Motorola in 2007. They were caught flat-footed by surprise because Apple announced the iPhone with a touch screen and they didn't have an answer to that. So this is an important issue, competitor uncertainty. You have to also figure out what are the strategies and tactics of the competitors. Even if they're current competitors or future competitors, a new competitor like Apple with the iPhone, it really changed the rules of the game. After 2007, it became mandatory for any company to offer a touch screen. And also Apple took control in the supply chain. They took control from the telecom service providers who were very powerful before that. So the strategies and tactics change. And thank you, Maya. As for competitive uncertainty, we are not sure if the competitors are able to copy the tech. Well, the issue of intellectual property protection it's really a part of the technology uncertainty, I feel, because you're not sure if the technology will be prevented from being copied by others. So the assumption is, if you have built a product, that you control the trade secrets, and it's a matter of time before the competitors will get to know and copy it. Also, for the market uncertainty, we are not able to determine the demand. Absolutely. Market uncertainty is about the inability to forecast the size of the market. Of course, managers do try to make some estimates and so on, but after all these years of experience, even a company like Apple has difficulty forecasting demand. The way they do it is that they will start pre-orders on September 19th, that is this Friday, and they will begin the delivery only on the next Friday, which is September 26th. So they have 1 week to try to forecast the inflow of orders, and they're going to make some projections and then tell their suppliers to build and stock up that much of inventory. So thank you. Those are all the issues with regard to the 3 types of uncertainty which surround high-tech products. And there are some other characteristics of high-tech products. Other characteristics are, high unit one costs. There's knowledge spillovers. There's network externalities. So my next question to the class is, can you help me define what these are? What are high unit one costs? What are knowledge spillovers? What are network externalities? And you could please use the Zoom webinar chat to all panelists to type in your responses so that we can all see them. So these were some concepts introduced in chapter 1. High unit one costs, knowledge spillovers, network externality, and it's important that we have a common understanding of these. So could you please respond and tell me, explain what these concepts are using the chat box. So thank you, Arla, for your response. The high unit cost is the cost of producing the first unit very high compared to the costs of reproducing the following units. Absolutely. Lisa, high unit one cost means that making the first product has high costs, but the items made after the first are then cheaper. Absolutely. Hanna, high unit one cost means that it is very expensive to produce the first unit. This is because R&D is expensive. So thank you to all of you. Those are absolutely right. But it's important to realize, why is the first unit very, very high? So you start with, there is high uncertainty surrounding the product or innovation. Now, to build the product, you have to employ a lot of scientists and engineers to try to reduce the uncertainty, right? The technology uncertainty has to be reduced before you can get a product out of the door. So how do you reduce that? It is by employing scientists and engineers. So the component of the high unit costs, it comes first and foremost from the salaries of the people that you have to employ. And secondly, it also might require investments in a lot of expensive machinery or equipment. So for example, I've read that the Airbus A380, which is the double-decker aircraft from Airbus, the first unit might have cost about $1 billion to make. So you can see that's the result of employing scientists and engineers, and also investing in a lot of fixed assets in terms of machinery and equipment. So Anna says, Anna Yulia, I don't see others' comments now. I think it should be all panelists and attendees. That's right. So thank you for pointing that out, Anna Yulia. So to Arla and Lisa and Hannah, you have selected all panelists, but if you select all panelists and attendees, then everyone will be able to see your response. Good. So now we are getting the hang of it in terms of using the right menu option in the chat box. Arna, thank you for your response, but your response is only to all panelists. Can you make it all panelists and attendees, please? So Arna, I like your explanation on network externalities. Could you please copy it into another message to all panelists and attendees? Then everybody will be able to see it. Thank you. So Arna has responded, network externalities are positive effects when the value of products go up when there are more users adopting them. So yes, in the context of high technology, we have so many platforms. You take Facebook as an example. The value of the network really increases exponentially as you add users to it. In all products, the more people that adopt a product, even if it's a consumer packaged good like soap or shampoo, there will be some increase in value as more and more people adopt it. But that increase will be kind of linear. We all benefit when more people adopt our brand of soap and shampoo, because the costs of get amortized over a larger number of people, so the unit costs decline and things become cheaper. But in high tech, when there's a platform of users, then the value will escalate exponentially as you add users, and so you can get big really fast, and you can become dominant really fast. So Hannah has answered about knowledge spillovers. The technology or aspects of the technology can be utilized in other applications. Very good. So thank you, Hannah, for your response. Today, solar panels we can see on almost any building rooftop, commercial or residential, but the original knowledge was generated by NASA, because spacecraft, on the way to the moon, they needed to have much more power, and so the solar panels supplemented the power available to them. So these are other characteristics. So it's very important to, when you're defining what is high tech in a measurable way, the conceptual definition is it's based on latest science and engineering discoveries. But to operationalize it, you have to, go through the 3 dimensions of technology uncertainty, market uncertainty, and competitor volatility. And then you have to look at these other characteristics: high unit one costs, knowledge spillovers, network externality. And that's what enables us to operationally get a handle on whether something is high tech or not. You could, for example, design a survey questionnaire where you ask customers, you give them a prototype, ask them to play with it, and then you ask them, do you see this is high levels of market uncertainty? And you could ask them specific questions like, do do you feel any consumer fear, uncertainty, and doubt? So on a scale of 1 to 10, you can have them rate the FUD factor, F-U-D, FUD, for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Or if the managers are working in a particular business for a long time, they can answer the questionnaire themselves as a proxy for customers. And then they could measure whether something is high tech or not. So the important principle is that, you know, high tech could be for almost any type of industry. You know, I have been to a forest in Finland where a single person with a heavy crane is able to clear out a whole forest in a matter of hours. You know, and building of that equipment must involve a lot of uncertainty, both in terms of technology and market. So even in traditional industries, you could have high-tech products. And even in a company like Dell, which used to be considered high-tech, if you look at some of their desktop PC products, they probably don't have any more uncertainty with them, because almost any company in the world can build a PC from existing off-the-shelf components. So that's why it's important to measure this uncertainty around a specific product or service. Let me pause here and ask if anybody has any other questions about chapter 1. It was an introduction to a lot of concepts, some of which we have discussed here, but there may be others that are of interest to you, and I want to give everybody a chance to ask using the webinar chat if you have any concepts or clarifications you need on this chapter, or any examples that would help to sharpen your understanding of the material. So looks like nobody has any more questions, so we can go to chapter 2 now. Chapter 2 is about strategic planning in high-tech firms. So the main question in this chapter is, well, first let me ask you, are there any concepts or issues that you would like to bring up to clarify your understanding of any of the material in chapter 2? Then I'll focus in on some other things. So right now, if you have any concepts or frameworks or principles in chapter 2 that you would like to have some discussion on, some clarification, please enter them in the webinar chat box. Okay, I don't see anybody asking anything, so let me type in my question to you. How is strategic planning different in high-tech firms from low-tech firms? In other words, you know, companies like Amazon, Google, Apple, Facebook, you know, these are normally considered high-tech firms. So what are the ways in which planning in those companies differs, let's say, from a paint company which makes paint for the walls in households and commercial buildings. I would consider paint not to be a high-tech product because the science and engineering hasn't changed much in a number of decades. So how do the planning processes differ? And I would like you to type in your responses in the webinar chat box and choose, please, all panelists and attendees. So nobody would like to share their answer to this question. How is strategic planning different in high-tech firms from low-tech firms? Okay, thank you, Lisa. I'm sorry, first we have, yes, Lisa Ann. Lisa Ann, you have more uncertainty when launching a high-tech product. Therefore, decisions will have to be more on the go because you cannot predict them very accurately. Yes, so you need more flexibility in planning for high-tech firms, and that is called emergent planning in chapter 2. Emergent planning versus formal planning. So let's talk about formal planning. Formal planning is when you have a defined time frame. You'll make a plan for 3 years or 5 years, right? There are documents where the plans are written out and you get a buy-in from different departments or teams, and you all agree and the plan is approved and in place before implementation. That is formal planning. The roles and responsibilities are well defined of those who are involved in the planning process. On the other hand, emergent planning is very flexible or improvisational. It arises from the grassroots, and it doesn't have a defined time frame. It is kind of doing the planning as you're driving the steering wheel of a car. So the high-tech firms need to do much better in terms of sense and respond. They have to have sensors in the marketplace, sensors about competitors, customers, about all the technological and environmental factors, and then they have to respond very quickly. So that is the kind of planning. Now, to be clear, even high-tech firms need to do formal planning. All companies need to do both types of planning. But I would say that the ratio of emergent to formal planning is higher in high-tech firms than in low-tech firms. And I would like to ask you if you can share any examples of a firm that is doing some type of emergent planning. So Lisa Ann brought up this issue of, the flexibility, more on the go. And then they begin with their correct capabilities and future capabilities. So the second aspect of, how strategic planning differs is in terms of the competencies. Explore new competencies versus exploit existing competencies. So, Apple knows very well competencies. Apple knows very well how to make smartphones and how to distribute and market them, but it's also getting into some new areas in which it doesn't have much of competence. There are reports that Apple is developing some software for autonomous self-driving cars, right? So that's something new that they have to learn. In the past, Apple used to be just a personal computer company. Then they got into music in a big way. So they had to learn those competencies for music. Hmm? So this is this is the second difference, is that in a high-tech company, the ratio of exploring new competencies to exploiting existing competencies, that ratio is higher for high-tech firms than for low-tech firms. Again, to be sure, all firms need to do both. They need to exploit existing competencies and they need to explore new competencies. But again, because there is market uncertainty and the needs of the customer are changing, therefore the competencies of the company have to be expanded. They have to learn new things, more so than in the low-tech company where there's not much to be learned. So that's the second aspect. So those are two. And again, I'm looking for examples of emergent planning, some practical business examples. Can anybody give an example of how a company is practicing emergent planning? So again, just to make this a little more tangible, uh, all companies they have plans, they have roadmaps, they want to bring out certain products and services at a certain time. But if they see that there are some new changes in the environment, they could improvise. So it is said that at Apple, after the smartphone, Steve Jobs really wanted to have the tablet as the next product. And he wasn't really, I'm sorry, first there was the iPod, the standalone digital music player on Apple's roadmap. Then there was the tablet was the second one, and the smartphone was the third one. However, in the early, after the iPod had a very successful launch, what did companies do in the feature phone industry? They started offering music on the feature phone. So you could download and play music on Nokia, Motorola, and Samsung phones, and that became a threat to the standalone iPad. I'm sorry, the standalone iPod. The iPod didn't have multifunctionality; it was just a music player. So what Steve Jobs did, he improvised. He pushed back the launch of the tablet, and he brought forward the smartphone, and that's when the iPhone got launched in 2007. So again, that's an example of emergent planning, that in the light of competitive threats, you're actually changing your formal roadmap to be more flexible and be more successful in the marketplace. How about an example from you guys on exploring new competencies? Any other example of companies that are doing this? So again, just to share an example which is very tangible, Google has a business unit called X. Okay, Yenny, you actually had the same example. So you said Google, but can you expand on that? How does Google show evidence of exploring new competencies? anybody else. We know that Google started out in search and advertising, and yes, they are creating a car at the moment. I believe that that car has already been road tested some 2 million miles. And yeah, there have been some bugs, there is some technology uncertainty, but the progress has been quite fast. And there are debates on how fast will a commercial self-driving car be released. A fully self-driving car. We have cars which now can do some amount of auto driving, but there's always a driver controlling everything. Google's radical vision is that these cars will not have a driver or a steering wheel, only passengers, and they'll go from point A to point B, just like an electric train, for example. There are so many unmanned electric trains operating in the world. So Google is trying to, over the past 5 years, they've been learning a lot about this technology of the software on and the radar, the signal, what you call those signals and sensors, how to put all of those things into the car so that they can stay clear of the obstacles on the road. So that's a good example. Okay, what are some other dimensions where strategic planning in high-tech firms is different from low-tech firms? That was in chapter 2. So a third aspect is that high-tech firms, they serve unarticulated needs of current customers, and they find new needs of new customers, versus serving articulated needs of current customers only. So this is a third point of difference, that low-tech firms are happy to just serve the articulated needs of their current customers. The current customers will tell them what they are not happy with, and then these companies will do incremental innovation. However, a high-tech firm, it not only serves the articulated needs of current customers, but it also looks for the opportunity to address latent needs of current customers, as well as for some of the really breakthrough innovations, they have to find completely new customers. And so this ratio of the first to the second is higher for high-tech firms than for low-tech firms. And we need to give some examples of serving unarticulated needs of current customers. So the best example is that, when Apple launched the touch screen with the iPhone in 2007, it was not something that customers were asking for. It was the intuition of Steve Jobs, who anticipated that customers in the future are going to want to operate the touch screen rather than a physical keyboard. Back in 2007, when the iPhone was launched, I had many friends who were BlackBerry users. Do you remember the BlackBerry? It had a physical keyboard, and they loved it because it had very good email capabilities, secure email. And when the iPhone first came out, they said, "Oh, I don't want any part of it. I can't use a touch screen. I love my physical keyboard. I must have it." And then where are those users today? All my friends have switched to some sort of smartphone. And BlackBerry as a company is in deep trouble because consumer tastes changed and people don't want physical keyboards anymore. So that's an example of serving an unarticulated need. And then an example of finding new needs of new customers. I want to give you an example from the motorcycle industry. I assume some of you like to ride motorcycles. So, you know, the Honda Motor Company, they first made motorcycles in the 1970s before they got into cars. And at that time in the 1970s, the dominant standard in the US was the Harley Davidson, you know, the big, fat, heavy, powerful bike, which we can see even today all over the world. On the other hand, what Honda had come up with was a 150cc bike, which was a toy in comparison. So Honda dispatched 3 salespeople to Los Angeles and said, try to find a market for this new product in the US. And those sales guys, you know, they went to all the motorcycle dealers at the time in Los Angeles and said, would you like to buy and stock our product? And, you know, always it was the Harley dealer who said, you know, you must be crazy. We don't stock toys here. We only stock real bikes, which is the Harley Davidson. So the salespeople were very dejected, and on the weekends, they used to ride their 150cc bikes to the hills around Los Angeles just for a picnic to cheer them up. And in the bicycle parking lot, while they were parking their bikes, some other picnickers came by and said, oh, how cute these bikes are. They're nice, colorful ones. Can you take me for a joyride? So they ended up spending the whole afternoon giving joyrides to people in the park. And then they got this phenomenal insight that instead of trying to sell these bikes to the Harley dealers, they repositioned it as a recreational vehicle for people to drive on the weekends. And they actually went to the manual pedal bike dealers and said, would you like to stock these? And they were happy to stock them. So that's how Honda got some traction in the US market for their underpowered motorcycles by finding new customers altogether. And that's what high-tech companies try to do more of. So again, this ratio of serving unarticulated needs and finding new needs to serving articulated needs of current customers, that ratio is higher for high-tech firms than for low-tech firms. Okay, and there's one more dimension along which high-tech firms differ quite a lot from low-tech firms. Can anybody try to define it for us? Please use the webinar chat if you know the answer. So we've already put down here on the Google Docs the 3 ways in which strategic planning in high-tech firms is different from low-tech firms. But there's one more major difference. Can somebody try to think what it might be and enter it into the webinar chat? Okay, so in this chapter 2, you might have read about these strategic postures that different firms can take a different stance in the marketplace with regard to how aggressive they want to be. So you have the pioneers or product leaders. You have the product leaders or pioneers. You have the fast followers or the analyzers. You have the differentiated defenders, also called customer intimacy, and then you have the low cost, operationally excellent companies, right? So there are 4 available postures, and we would say that high-tech firms are more often pioneers and fast followers compared to low-tech firms. So low-tech firms prefer to be defenders or operationally excellent, whereas high-tech firms prefer to be pioneers and fast followers. Again, because they want to capitalize on the opportunity early. There's such huge unit one costs that they want to be early in the market, get dominant, and then they can ride the product life cycle all the way to the top. So you'll see examples of this. Again, I would say there's so many examples, Amazon would be considered a product leader in so many areas. E-commerce was one, cloud warehousing services is another. Google also has got into so many areas beyond search and advertising. The history of the PC industry, Apple was the first company to launch a PC in 1976. IBM was a fast follower. They came in 1981. So again, you see this where there is where the companies have this interest in exploiting a quick opportunity due to new technology, then they're more often a pioneer or a fast follower. A company like Dell is not a pioneer or fast follower. They are more operationally excellent company. So these are the ways in which high-tech firms differ in their planning processes. And I want to give you a chance to react to this. Do you have any comments or examples to share of any of the things that we've put down in terms of the differences in strategic planning between high-tech and low-tech firms? If you do, please use the webinar chat. Are you curious to know anything more about the issues in chapter 2 while you were reading the book or while you were viewing the video? Were there any doubts in your mind on how any of this applies to some companies or industries with which you may be familiar? If you do, please share that with us in the webinar chat. Okay, looks like there are no more issues there. So let's go to chapter 3, which is about organizational culture and climate. Do you have any issues with regard to chapter 3? Now we've transitioned to chapter 3. What are some of the things that are of interest to you that you might like to discuss? Please enter them in the webinar chat. Even if there are issues about organizational culture that were not in the chapter, but you have some experience of it from any experiences that you might have, then, and you would like to raise those issues, this is your time, this is your lecture, so please do avail of this opportunity to learn not just from the book and the video, but also from each other. That's why we encourage you to participate in the webinar chat. Since nobody's asking anything in the chat, here's my first question. What is the difference between organizational culture and climate? Could you take a moment to answer this if you know the answer in the webinar chat? Thank you, Lisa. And organizational climate is what the company expects and wants of its employees. Very good. So this is the intention of the top management or the founders. And culture is the why, climate is the how. I don't know if culture is the why, because it just lays down what the values are, what the norms of behavior are, and what are some of the symbols and rituals used within the organization. So it's still descriptive. Uh, they don't need to explain why they have a certain value. So I would say culture is the intent of the management with regard to values, norms of behavior, symbols, and rituals. And culture, I'm sorry, climate is how is that actually being manifest on a day-to-day basis. So I would say, culture is the way we should do things, and climate is how they are actually being done on a day-to-day basis. So culture is the intent of top management or founders. How should things be done? Whereas climate is how are things actually being done? What do you see? So an example of this is, a lot of companies have put in their, nice vision and mission statements that they value diversity. Diversity is one of those buzzwords which is going around all of top corporations. Hmm? But let's say you actually visit a company after you read the diversity principles from their website, and you actually see that there is no diversity, that they are all people with the same backgrounds and they all look like each other, and then there's some disconnect between what is being done in practice versus what is the climate. I'm sorry, what is the culture. So the first inference is there must be consistency between culture and climate. Otherwise, it is not credible. You're paying only lip service to the culture and things are happening differently. And that's what becomes dysfunctional within the organization. Hmm? Now, why is culture important? Why are we studying it as a part of high tech? Is because you need a fit between strategy and culture in order to get good market performance. So if for example you want to be a strategy of being a product leader, you want to be first in the market, then you must have a culture of innovativeness to support that. Whereas if your strategy is to be a low cost, operationally excellent company, then your culture must encourage optimization of process. The outcome is not as important, it's efficiency that's important. So whatever strategic posture you adopt, it must have a good fit with the culture. Otherwise, you're not going to get a good performance. And I think intuitively we all understand this if we've interviewed for jobs and if we have worked for any organization, isn't it the case that we feel more comfortable within certain organizations and then we feel uncomfortable maybe in another one because, our particular values may not align with the company's strategy. So this happens a lot, in high-tech firms. Usually the culture is dominated by scientists and engineers. It is their values that are dominant because they founded the company. And then it's not easy for somebody who works in marketing to convince them that you need to also do good marketing in order to make the product a success. So you need to change the culture in order to affect the strategy and the performance. So that's why we need to study culture. Okay. So now we can look at two aspects of culture. What are the obstacles? So everyone, all high-tech companies want to build a culture of innovativeness. High-tech companies who are mainly product leaders and followers want to build a culture of innovativeness. Would you agree? So then the question is, what are the facilitators of innovativeness and what are the obstacles? What are the facilitators of a culture of innovativeness and what are the obstacles to implementing a culture of innovativeness? So could you please answer and I don't want the whole long list, just tell me if there are any facilitators that you found more interesting than the others. There's some 9 or 10 different facilitators. Can you tell me what is it that you found interesting and what is it that you might like some clarifications or examples on? So let's address the first question. What are the facilitators of a culture of innovativeness? And could you please answer in the webinar the things that are of most interest to you? Okay, I'll put down here unlearning, risk taking, skunk works, and then in terms of obstacles to innovativeness, there's the core rigidities. So I want to thank Sana, Son Farm, Lisa, Arla, Maya, and Kilpier for their contributions here. The other one I found here is from Kilpier, which is Innovator's Dilemma. So Maya says, skunk works, I found it interesting because it requires the employees to go a bit against the culture, which doesn't encourage innovation. That's right. So let's talk about skunk works a bit and then look at some examples. The skunk is an animal that lives deep inside the earth, and during the day they are hibernating under the earth, and they only come out at night. And if they feel threatened, then they give out a really bad stink, a smell. So the idea is that within certain high-tech firms, if there is a very creative breakthrough project, then very often the top management wants to insulate that project not only from competition, which you don't want competitors to know about any of your projects because they could sabotage it, but more importantly, you want to shield that particular project from the bureaucracy and the politics of the organization. And this is very common. When Steve Jobs wanted Apple to get into retail, they finally launched in 2001, but there was a prototype of a store in an unmarked building in Cupertino, which nobody knew what's going on. But inside that particular building, they had laid out an Apple store, the concept of it, and they were testing it with different products and different layouts and different consumers coming in and giving their suggestions and so on. When Apple finally launched in 2001, it took everybody by surprise because it was not within Apple's competencies to get into retail at all. So it is also what we call a stealth project, shielded from anybody else. And why is it important to shield it? There are two reasons. One is that, the metrics needed to judge a breakthrough project have to be different because you need to invest up front. You can't apply the same kind of budget and time deadlines to a breakthrough project as to an incremental innovation. And then secondly, think of how projects are funded within organizations. There are these interdepartmental committees and they all get to vote. Should you invest in this new project or not? So the example of the IBM PC is very illustrative about the politics of the organization. Why did IBM send its 12 members of the PC team? There were a dozen people who were sent to Boca Raton, Florida, 3,000 miles away from headquarters in Armonk, New York. And that was an example of a skunk project, because if this was not kept secret, then in the new product development process, the people who would be voting on funding this PC project would be people from the mainframe computer division, the mini computer division, and they would all feel threatened by this new technology and this new product, and therefore they may vote the project down. There's a book by the former chairman of IBM called Lou Gerstner, which documents that the elephants would kill the mice. The mice were the people in the PC team, and the elephants were the mainframe computer group. So they would just, veto these ideas. So skunk works are important to protect and shield breakthrough projects from competition, from internal bureaucracy, as well as from the politics of the organization. So Lisa, thank you for your question. Could skunkworks be outsourcing innovations, or is it only company employees that are taken out from the company's normal environment? So Lisa, it applies more to the company's normal environment. Outsourcing is possible for many different things, but it's generally for incremental stuff. If you want to protect your intellectual property, you want the project to be in-house. And so the skunk works is a mechanism for keeping the project in-house with your own company employees, but still protecting it from the bureaucracy and the politics of the organization. That was an excellent question, Lisa. Thank you for doing that, for asking that. Okay, so now let's take some of the others that have come up here. Unlearning. So I want to discuss unlearning and core rigidities together. You know the concept of core competence. The Honda Motor Company has a competence in manufacturing and distribution of small internal combustion engines. That has been its expertise right from the beginning. Small internal combustion engines, whether it's petrol-based or diesel-based. And that competence is its core competence, which has served it so well in so many different product markets. But, if Honda starts believing that it is only internal combustion engines that's the best technology forever, and it ignores any of the other changes that are happening in terms of hybrid cars with batteries or fully electric cars, then that's going to affect it, right? Negatively. It will be like Nokia ignoring the potential for smartphones. And so sometimes the core competencies become core rigidities, where you become arrogant as a company and you think that your technology is the best and nothing else comes close to it. So, Nokia believing that its Symbian operating system would be the best always is a core rigidity, and it needs to unlearn this if it wants to foster a culture of innovativeness. So we have to learn new competencies and we have to unlearn our core rigidities. That's why those two are important. And risk-taking. Risk-taking is so important, and we know this is so true more for startups. Startups are able to take much more risks than large corporations. In Silicon Valley, if a venture capitalist is trying to invest in a new startup, one of the questions they ask the entrepreneur is, how many projects have you tried and failed at that haven't come to market launch? And that is seen as a positive, because if an entrepreneur has taken risks and failed, then they would have gained some new learnings from that, which can be applied to the new venture. And they also signal this issue of perseverance, or sisu as you call it in Finland. So risk taking is not considered negative in the high-tech world. When VCs have a portfolio of products, they follow the 631 rule, the portfolio of investments. They expect that 6 of their investments will fail. They expect 3 will break even. And they're all looking for that one super hit, which will be the next Google, the next Amazon, or the next Facebook. So again, risk taking is very important. And there's a very good TED talk that I would recommend for you all to see offline. It's called The Benefits of Innovation. I think I have it somewhere here. I don't have the time to show it, but I'll show you the title and you can Google it later. The Unexpected Benefit of Celebrating Failure. This is an excellent TED talk from Google. I will write it here. The title, Risk Taking. See this TED talk, The Unexpected Benefits of Celebrating Failure. And this is only applicable to Google X, which is the really risk-taking part of Google. There they give bonuses to teams that fail on products. It may seem counterintuitive, but there is a culture of failing fast and failing early, because when you fail early and fail fast, you learn something that can then be applied to improve the next iteration. And so risk-taking is extremely important aspect of innovativeness. Okay, so then that leaves the innovator's dilemma. And just to be clear, I want to explain this a little more. So I'm going to use a PowerPoint to explain the innovator's dilemma in diagrammatic form. Please bear with me while I share this particular PowerPoint. Sorry, it's not in chapter 2, it's in chapter 3. I'm having some difficulty pulling up my PowerPoint. Please bear with me. Here, chapter 3. Okay, let's go to the innovator's dilemma. Right, so here is the diagram that explains the innovator's dilemma, and I want to be clear how this is an obstacle to innovation. So most companies, they will operate on the top black line. Those are called incumbent firms, the firms that are already in the industry. Okay. And you can see how steep the slope is. That is, every year the incumbents try to improve their product functionality or performance. Why? Because of competitive reasons. Right? Intel will come up with a better chip every year. Samsung and Apple, they compete so much on features and functionality. Galaxy 7, 8, 9 and Apple phone 7, 8, 10 and so on. So there's a lot of competition around here, but the prices and margins are very fat. And this is called the sustaining technology, because it sustains the incumbents. It's their bread and butter. Now, what do the customers require? The customer requirements are increasing rather slowly along this red line. So the gap between what the incumbents offer, the supply and the demand, is increasing. And this means essentially that customers have to pay more for the performance, even if they don't need it, right? Now consider this lower black line where it starts close to the origin of time. So here you can see that the new entrant with the disruptive technology is very inferior and doesn't meet the customer requirements. So what the impact of this is that the incumbent firms, they discount the threat from the disruptive technology. They'll say things like, oh, this is just a toy, it's not going to affect us. But what happens over time is that the new entrant improves the performance of the disruptive technology until it passes the red line. And that is a very significant point, because after that, the new entrant meets the customer requirements and it can be offered at a much lower price because it doesn't have all the performance and the functionality that the incumbents offer. And this is where then it becomes a threat and takes the market away from the incumbent. The existing customers switch to the new entrant. So the innovator's dilemma is this, that at what point should you switch from the sustaining technology to the disruptive technology? If you switch too early, it's possible that the technology may fizzle out and die. And the example I would give you is, there was a product called the Apple Newton in the early 1990s. It was launched at a great cost, maybe $1 billion or so. And then it just bombed. It did not improve and it did not meet customer requirements. It had to be withdrawn from the marketplace. So now, and so if the incumbent invests too early in the disruptive technology, it may be wasted, that investment. And if it waits too late, then it will get disrupted and the business will go away. Think of retail bricks and mortar along the top black line, and think of Amazon in e-commerce. Now we use another term for disruption, which is called being Amazoned in retailing. So many bookstores like Borders in the USA have closed down because of the threat of Amazon. There's other examples. You can think of, Kodak being the dominant player in digital imaging, a decade ago. And then, Kodak was the incumbent in chemical processing of film. And then came digital imaging from, Minolta and Sony and Canon. And what happened to Kodak? It went into bankruptcy. So the innovator's dilemma is twofold. One is that at what time should I jump onto the disruptive bandwagon, and also how much should I invest in that? Because if I invest too little, the disruptive technology is not going to develop. And if I invest too much, I might have big losses. So this is the innovator's dilemma. It happens in all tech industries, and therefore this becomes an obstacle to a culture of innovativeness. So I believe that now we have answered all the issues that you raised, which were of interest to you. Is there any other issues that you'd like to raise with regard to the facilitators of innovation, the obstacles, or how is this implemented by way of examples? Are there anything else that you would like to bring up in chapter 3? This would be a good time to enter it into the webinar chat. Can you give an example of that we haven't already cited? Don't give the big examples of Apple, Amazon, Google, or Facebook, but if you have other examples of companies that have a good culture of innovativeness, either in Finland or in any of the other countries that you may be from, could you share that example on the webinar chat? I'm very eager to know what are some of the other examples of innovative companies that have a very supportive culture, and how do they implement it to support a risk tolerance or unlearning or skunk works or any of the other facilitators of innovation. Any thoughts? Can you give me an example of a product champion? One of the facilitators of innovativeness is a product champion. Can you give me an example which will illustrate that you've really understood what the concept is from any company with which you may be familiar? Okay, thank you, Lisa. And you give a example of takeaway.com. They revolutionized the takeaway business. So I'm going to click on this link because I'm not too familiar, but I want to know what this company does. So it's obviously in the food delivery business, am I right? And it operates globally in a number of countries. I'm not familiar with them in the US, but we have many other delivery companies. Yeah, you see, the US is not part of this. Okay, doesn't matter. So you can put your zip code there, and then it gives you all the restaurants that deliver to your house. Okay, so yeah, there is this similar types of services that I'm familiar with. It was the first before Uber Eats. Okay, so it was a pioneer. So it's a very innovative company, being a product leader. And can you share some aspects of their organization culture? Do we know how they demonstrate things like risk tolerance or unlearning? started with students from information technology. Where was it? In which country did they start in, Lisa Ann? In the Netherlands. Okay, that's good. From the University of 20. Okay. Yeah, I know that University of 20 has a very good technology program. And if the founders are students, then and they are recently from the university, then they try to replicate the university culture within their organizations. That's been my experience. And so that's a much more open-minded culture, right? LUT, the slogan is open your mind, right? It's a very good slogan, and it applies to high tech, where we need to have a culture of openness. They make a lot of investments. They failed a lot and are very non-hierarchical. Excellent. Yes, Sana gives the example of Supercell, and I've actually visited their offices in Helsinki, and I have some former students who work there, and it's really nice. They have some rooms for relaxation. Even it's a very laid back type of culture, and they have free food and drinks, and the people are quite young. They want to encourage creativity in games. It's a very flexible culture in terms of time and dress, and as long as you're completing your projects on time and they're successful, they don't really care so much about the formal aspects of the culture. So thank you for sharing those examples of takeaway.com as well as Supercell, and they're excellent examples. And this is the way that we learn from each other, is that you share what is part of your experience and I share what is part of my experience, and that's where the learning gets enhanced. So I go back to my lecture notes. Anybody can share an example of a product champion? What is a product champion? Is it a product? Please interact in terms of the webinar chat. So Sonfam, I've got an email from you requesting access to the Google Docs, but it will be more organized if I just use it and you use the webinar. Later on, I will post this in Moodle, so you can have this as a reference document. But I want to have control over it while we are actually doing the lecture. So I'm not going to give you access to the Google Docs right now, but I will make it available in Moodle after the lecture. So nobody wants to give me an example of a product champion. If you don't, then I don't know whether you know the concept or you don't know the concept. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip to chapter 4, which is about market orientation and interfunctional coordination. I'll leave it up to you to figure out who a product champion is. It's quite straightforward, and it's in the book and the video. Let's go to chapter 4. Were there any issues you were curious about that you would like to discuss in the 9 minutes that we have left? Market orientation involves the collection of market information or intelligence. You collect it from different sources like salespeople in the field, trade shows and conferences and things like that. Then you have to, bring it back to the organization and disseminate it among all the rank and file. People have to then integrate that with whatever they know already, and then there has to be a coordinated action response in terms of exploiting that opportunity. And in general, we believe market oriented firms perform better in the marketplace. Is there any aspect of market orientation that you would like to know more about? I believe this is a very mainstream marketing concept that also may be covered in other courses in your program. And then interfunctional coordination is that you have all these departments within a large enterprise. And when you're trying to have a coordinated response to the information that you receive, there has to be very good information sharing and communication between departments. And we see particularly problems between the R&D scientists, engineers, and communicating with the folks in the business departments and in marketing. And this can sometimes get very dysfunctional. The engineers and scientists, they are trained in a very different manner. The laws of natural science in physics and chemistry and engineering, they are invariant across 170 countries in the world. But businesses and marketing have to deal with human behavior, and that is social science, which means we have theories, but they are probabilistic. We say more often than not, a product life cycle will look like an S-shaped curve, but it doesn't mean that in 100% of the cases, it will follow that particular shape. And so, the training of business people and marketeers is to be a little more flexible in terms of processing the data and the information and the learnings, whereas engineers, they don't like uncertainty. They want to deal more with certain rules that are easy to program. They want to do things that are breakthrough for the long term. Marketeers and salespeople are accountable for results in the short term. So there are these different values, if you will, and backgrounds and training. And so when there is a conflict between marketing and R&D, we try to say that let's arrive at some understanding. If the project is a very breakthrough one, where technology uncertainty is very high, then let R&D take the lead and marketing should follow. But for incremental innovation, where marketing is in touch with customers and they can tell you what they want, then marketing will bring the voice of the customer back to R&D, and then R&D should improve the product in order to meet the customer needs. So that's an important theory from chapter 4, is that for breakthrough products, R&D should take the lead, marketing should follow. And for incremental products, marketing should take the lead, and R&D should follow. If you follow this simple rule, you will get a lot less conflict and dysfunctional communication between the organizations. So that's an important takeaway from this chapter. Now we have 5 minutes left. I want to again give you time to ask me anything you like about chapter 4. There's a lot more than we have time for, but you at least have 5 minutes. So go ahead and see if you want to ask me anything, either about chapter 4, or we can even throw it open to any of the other concepts that we covered today in chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. So sorry. Thank you, Hannah, for bringing up the chasm. And this was also a question early on brought up by Ahmed. I'm sorry if I skipped over that. So there was a question on the chasm, and there was a brief reference to chasm in chapter 1. Um, and we will discuss a lot more about the chasm in chapter 6. But to tell it in a brief way, there are segments of customers who adopt at different times if there is any product or innovation. You probably know these categories from other marketing courses. There's innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. So the innovators and early adopters together are called the early market, and the early majority and late majority, that is called the mainstream market. So very often a product will get some initial traction in the early market, because innovators and early adopters are curious and they're not price sensitive. They want to adopt the latest things, so they will buy the product. But then suddenly the sales declines, or it remains flat, and the life cycle doesn't kick into growth. And that's what we call the gap or the chasm between the early market and the mainstream market. Many products, high-tech products, fall into this gap. And so that is the question. If you want, I can just tell you what the answer to that question was in chapter 1. So what was the question about? It was, the chasm is characterized by the divide between visionaries and pragmatists. The visionaries are the innovators and early adopters, and the pragmatists are risk averse, the early majority. So that is really the definition. And if you didn't get that right, that's okay. We will learn much more about it later on. So thank you for your question, Hannah, about the chasm. I have a question from Sana. Could you please explain this? Greater R&D marketing integration in technical activities is required for breakthrough. Yes. So, Sana, in breakthrough, there's a very high uncertainty, right? Breakthrough has got high has got high market uncertainty, technology uncertainty, and competitor uncertainty. So if you want to bring out a breakthrough innovation, you need much better integration of knowledge and communication between the departments like R&D and marketing. If they are silos, if they are separate, then it's much more difficult to launch a breakthrough innovation, and you will probably get more incremental innovation from an organization which is siloed into departments. So I hope that clears it up. I want to thank all of you for participating in lecture 1. We are at the end of our time, but if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to email me, sanjit.sengupta@gmail.com. Otherwise, I wish you a good night in Lapiranta, and I will meet you back here in another couple of weeks. And Lisa Ann has responded to your question as well, Sana. I hope you can see that. Thank you, Yenny, and have a good night. Bye-bye.